I curse the day I ever set foot in that forsaken village in the remotes of Eastern Europe. What started as a summer backpacking adventure abroad with my buddy Rob quickly descended into a waking nightmare from which I'm still struggling to escape. We were a few weeks into our journey, high on the thrill of experiencing new cultures and the lure of the open road. After a few days exploring the capital city, we decided to veer off the beaten path a bit, venturing into the rural countryside, where the region's oldest traditions still endured. That's how we found ourselves in that strange, isolated hamlet, tucked away in the densely wooded hills and untouched by modern hands. The village looked straight out of the medieval era, with its thatched-roof cottages and narrow, winding lanes straddling a gently flowing river. "This is more like it," Rob had grinned, slapping me on the shoulder. "No tourist traps or tacky souvenir shops here. We're gonna get a real taste of the old world." I smiled back, but couldn't help feeling a prickling unease as the locals turned to gawk at us with thinly veiled suspicion. Some averted their gaze entirely as we passed, muttering under their breath in hushed tones. Children stopped in their games to stare, their eyes stretched wide. Still, we pressed on undeterred, through the sleepy village, drinking in the sights, sounds, and thick, earthy scents. It wasn't long before we found the ramshackle tavern, a lopsided, timber-framed building nestled between the cottages, with a rusty old sign creaking in the breeze. "Now we're talking," Rob had laughed, rubbing his hands together eagerly. "Come on, let's grab a beer and meet some of the locals. Get the inside scoop." The dimly lit interior was straight out of a Tolkien novel, all low-beamed ceilings and red flickering lanterns. A haze of wood smoke and stale body odor hung thick in the air. Villagers nursing mugs of ale looked up as we entered, their ruddy faces creasing with displeasure at the sight of the outsiders. An uncomfortable hush fell over the patrons. I felt their eyes boring into me like smoldering coals as we bellied up to the pocked and scarred bar top. "What'll it be, strangers?" The barkeep's gruff voice sliced through the silence like a dull knife. His narrowed eyes flicked up and down, sizing us up with naked appraisal. "Two of your finest local brews, good sir," Rob replied with an easy smile, seemingly oblivious to the tension in the room. The barkeep's mouth twisted into a scowl, but he turned to fetch a pair of dusty, ceramic mugs from the battered taps. Rob dropped a few tarnished coins on the bar top, and we clutched our drinks, searching for an unoccupied table. No one would meet our eye. The villagers simply nursed their drinks, muttering under their breath in that impenetrable language that sounded more like a series of phlegmy growls than any proper tongue. Eventually, a burly man with a tangled beard and threadbare clothes motioned us over to his table in the far corner, with a jerk of his bristled chin. We slid into the rickety chairs across from him, forced smiles plastered on our faces despite the palpable hostility. "You shouldn't have come here, outsiders," the grizzled man spoke at last in thickly accented English. "This village is not for you." I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my back, despite the dank chill of the tavern. Rob just laughed, mistaking the warning as some antiquated peasant suspicion of strangers. "Hey now, no need for any of that," he chuckled, raising his mug in a mock toast. "We're just a couple of guys, looking to experience a little local culture, that's all. Ain't any harm in that, is there?" The villager's filmy eyes narrowed to slits. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into, do you?" His tone was laced with bitterness and was that a glimmer of pity. Leave before it's too late. This is your last chance. With that ominous pronouncement, the man rose from the table, quaffed the last dregs of his beer, and stalked from the tavern without a backward glance. Rob and I sat in stupefied silence for a few moments after his abrupt exit. I could feel the weight of the stares from the other patrons, pressing in on me from all sides. Well, that was weird, Rob finally managed with an uneasy chuckle. He drained his mug and slammed it down on the pocked tabletop. I want more beer. I hesitated, all my instincts screaming at me to get the hell out of this forsaken place right then and there. But the alcohol was loosening my apprehension, eroding that nagging sense of dread that had been gnawing at my gut. Before I could protest, Rob had snagged the barkeep's attention and ordered 2 more mugs of that murky, tar-black brew. I matched him drink for drink until the unease relented, replaced by a pleasant numbness. Over the next 2 hours, that numbness curdled into the deepest, darkest intoxication I've ever experienced, despite my normal high tolerance. The heady fumes of the mysterious local ale overwhelmed my senses, drawing a thick veil of disorientation over my mind. At some point, I dimly became aware of the old men gathered around our table, their tangled beards brushing my face as they leaned in close with excited murmurs in that guttural, indecipherable tongue. Clawed hands gripped my shoulders with surprising strength, practically wrenching me from the chair. That's when things get muddled. Distorted images flicker at the edges of my memory, like trying to recall a feverish nightmare. Twisted, leering faces looming over me as rough hands stripped me of my clothes and possessions. A glint of moonlight on some archaic, rusted blade. The acrid stench of lit torches and some pungent, herbal smoke invading my lungs in billowing waves. Even through the drunken haze, I felt the familiar rush of ice water through my veins, the unmistakable, primal grip of sheer terror taking hold as I realized I was in mortal danger. Yet I could do nothing against the sheer tide of gnarled, calloused hands restraining me. At some point, they must have drugged me. Maybe it was slipped in that black, viscous beer, while my wits were foggy and unguarded. That would explain the dark, dreamless descent into blessed oblivion that followed. I have no memory of how I ended up, where I did when I finally clawed my way back to consciousness. All I knew was that I was encased in utter, suffocating blackness. The air was hot and stale, redolent with a sweet, musky odor I couldn't place. Trying to move, I felt the sickening constriction of something rough and unyielding, binding me to a hard surface below. My frantic thrashing only succeeded in tightening those coarse, fibrous bonds, cutting into my bare flesh. Whatever it was, it felt almost like vines or twisted roots woven into some inescapable sheath. I opened my mouth to scream, but only a muffled, impotent gurgle escaped past, whatever thick, spongy gag stuffed between my clenched jaws. My eyes strained futilely against the smothering dark, trying and failing to make out any outline, any suggestion of where this rustic, primordial prison might be. Just when I teetered on the edge of blacking out from sheer panic, that's when I heard it, a low, drawn-out, guttural drone, vibrating through the unseen floor and walls around me. It grew steadily louder, underscored by the rhythmic thump of drums, and were those chanted voices joining the discordant chorus. I squirmed in desperation, only to feel the rough restraints bite deeper into my chafed skin at the frantic movements. The chamber was suffused with a deep, throbbing beat that amplified the harsh gutturals into a deafening crescendo. Suddenly, the darkness fractured as a yawning hatch must have slid open above, bathing the chamber in dim, flickering light and curling tendrils of smoke. The crack widened until I glimpsed the unmistakable glow of torches and wavering silhouettes of cowled figures clustered around some sort of pit or aperture. My screaming was little more than muffled grunts as my wriggling intensified. I bucked against the restraints, felt them slowly shredding my flesh in narrow rivulets of red that ran sticky and hot down my naked back and sides. The ponderous, reverberating chants swelled to incalculable decibels, stripping my senses until that metronomic, droning pulse was all I knew. I squeezed my eyes shut as the air grew thick and cloying with a miasma of sickly sweet smoke. Then I felt it, something shifting, pressing against the unyielding surface below. A series of sickening crackles, like knuckles grinding against brittle bone, as whatever that foul presence was began to push, to ooze and undulate beneath me. I could feel boiling, viscous moisture seeping through the crevices, beating against my exposed skin in hot, stinging drops. The taste of molten copper flooded my mouth, setting my every nerve ending ablaze with white-hot panic. With a sickening lurch, the corruption burst fully formed into that sweltering pit, scalding me with its rancid, brackish wave of slick, quivering membranous tendrils. I felt them creeping, probing with loathsome insistence over my thrashing limbs, leaving slick trails of putrid ichor in their wake. That's when the ancient, slithering horror birthed itself fully into the firelit chamber, emitting a protracted, gurgling roar that nearly clawed what remained of my sanity to tattered shreds. It was as if some festering, blasphemous afterbirth of Lucifer himself had sloughed free from the dripping placenta of the netherworld. Sight, sound, smell, my reeling senses were overwhelmed by the rank, keening presence, struggling to put cohesive shape or form to this freshly summoned abomination. I glimpsed hints of undulating rot, glistening mandibles, and bottomless pits of depthless hunger where eyes should have been. The frantic litany of howling, guttural invocations reached a bone-rattling, ululating crescendo. My scream of abject horror threatened to rupture my very lungs as I felt those questing tendrils encircle my limbs, exerting their relentless, crushing grip. Darkness. Blessed, merciful oblivion, followed by what? In the wake of whatever cosmically damned ritual I endured, in the clutches of those degenerate primitives, my memory has become a tattered patchwork quilt riddled with holes. Sometimes, in my most vivid night terrors, I'll awaken in a cold sweat, raw throat throbbing from silent screams. Disturbing images cling to me like viscous rot, a profaned altar littered with the corroded fragments of antiquated bone catalysts. The glint of guttering torchlight, flickering over uncured hides, stretched taut with desiccated runes and lurid pictograms. The distant ululation of hunting voices gilded in madness, echoing through primordial tunnels. No matter how far I run, I fear the remnants of that eldritch monstrosity lurks ever at the edges of my tattered psyche, awaiting the slightest crack through which that virulent corruption can seep in and take root once more, assimilating me into its repugnant gestalt of hungering, roiling ecstasies. Some nights I'll awake to find my hands scrawling those profane, spidery runes on every available surface in a frenzied, automatic trance. Only the howling of my own screams can summon me back from that waking delirium. In my most lucid, anguished contemplations, I wonder, what if that ulcerous, cyclopean entity didn't emerge full-formed from the fetid sprawl of inhuman passion that fateful night? What if instead its reeking seed took root in the loam of my own decimated consciousness? Perhaps even now, it incubates within the moldering recesses of my fractured mind, feeding in the dark, gestating, spreading its unholy tendrils through whatever tatters of sanity still remain, patiently awaiting the ultimate, obscene culmination of its fecund, blasphemous rebirth.